It's soothing.
Well, talk about it, girl.
Oh, it's soothing to me.
I'm talking to Grant Reid. He is just such a special person. He's been involved with the theater and writing and all aspects of it. And he just wrote this book. What's the name of your book, Grant?
The name of the book is Rhythm for Sale, and it's titled after one of my grandfather, Leonard Harper's shows that he did in Chicago in the 1930s for Al Capone's. Al Capone had a cotton club on the West Coast in Chicago, in the Midwest Coast in Chicago, called the Grand Terrace Review.
Okay.
And my
God, I'm sorry.
My grandfather was sent out there. He went out there to work for the Capone organization the same year that Al Capone went to prison for tax evasion. But all of his mafiosi friends that were not convicted ran the nightclub.
Well, you know, I've talked to Graham because he's not only an author, but he's also a very dear friend of myself and my family. And you were telling me that you got some reviews with your book.
Yeah, I did. One of the reviews came from the Kikarus, and they're a big book company. They're a big book review company. And I was told that I didn't know how lucky I was because I got such a positive review. And the reviewer said that basically, I could quote, he said that he basically thought I was the pulse beat of the Harlem Renaissance, and partly because of the deep research that I did, but also the phrases that I use are very authentic because my grandmother, Fanny Pennington, she's part of the book, and I knew her most of my life, and she died this year, but all of her friends were Cotton Club girls and performers, and I knew the way they talked because I grew up around them.
Mm-hmm.
And so I used a lot of that, their lingo and their affectations in the book, and because I grew up around that. And I wanted to tell you something special. When I was christened by Adam Powell as a baby, my grandfather Leonard Harper was not alive, and he was a big time producer. But Benny Ashburn stood in for my grandfather at my christening. And he was my godfather, and he turned out to be a producer too later on in life.
Oh, I forgot you were that close. Well, you know, Grant, who I'm speaking to now, Grant Reid, he's like my son. You know, him and my son are very equal, and I've watched him grow up. I grew up with his mother. I knew his mother very well, Jeanne, right?
Right.
And she had the same name I did, so I'd never forget her.
And you looked out for me, though, when Motown and Commodore's Entertainment were having a production meeting at Benny's penthouse office. You called me up, and I remember exactly what you said. Grant, you better get your butt down to the penthouse. And because I went down to the penthouse, naturally, since he was my godfather, they had to put me on the payroll.
Oh, that is so cool. That's so cool.
We made the Commodore's first documentary because they were the first black group to sell out 2 shows at Madison Square Garden at the time.
Yes, that's
and
true.
And Suzanne DePass was in Hawaii. She was producing it. Nancy LaVisca, who was very close with Berry Gordy, she was one of the producers on hand, and Berry Gordy produced it. And eventually, the director saw that I was telling the Commodores what to do, and he just said to me out on the street in front of the hotel room, he says, Grant, you want to direct the rest of the movie? So I did, and when we were in Madison Square Garden, and Eddie Kendricks was there, one of the Isley brothers, and then the limo pulled up with LaToya Jackson and Michael Jackson in the limo.
Oh, my God.
And since, I used to go to all the Jackson 5 shows because of Benny with Motown, I just grabbed Michael by the collar out the limo and put him on, I said, get on the table. I knocked the fruit off, and he started dancing for the movie. His sister was mad. She wanted to kill me.
Oh, that's a wild story.
And so, but at that time, I still didn't know about my grandfather, Leonard Harper.
Yes. And
it took me decades. I worked in the film industry doing locations for everybody. I even worked on the Cotton Club with Francis Coppola. And I still didn't know about Delilah Jackson, the historian, told me, she says, these are your grandfather's shows. I still didn't know until I went to County Cullen Library, and I was walking out, and I saw a Harlem Renaissance book on the table, and I looked for his name, and I saw Leon Harper. It was spelled wrong, but on the bottom it said BB, and the librarian told me, go over to the Schomburg and get Blacks in Blackface, and I found 8 pages, and that's how I started my whole research thing on him.
Well, it takes a person like you the observant and having a fabulous memory, which you do have, to write a book or to be an author, because there's a certain amount of total recall that you have as I'm listening to you now, because some of the things you're telling me now, I remember, but I've never remembered them. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Well, I remember Benny loved you, and Benny Ashburn. Benny Ashburn, by the way, everybody out there, lived in Harlem, lived in the Lenox Terrace, lived right by us because we were all in the River Bend, and we were one big happy family. And then, of course, Susan DePass was right down the street in Riverton, and you name it. And Grant has been in the neighborhood, or in the community, rather, for all of his life. And, of course, his mother was living in the Riverton. So, I mean, it's just always all of us. And so many people don't know, Grant, how that, I call it the L shape, going down from River Bend down to 135th Street and up to, across 135th Street, up to Lenox Avenue, how we've all been, we're a community as well as a lot of family.
Yeah, and Percy Sutton and Charlie Rangel and David Patterson, Danny Patterson, you know, all of us are all very close and friends. And but the thing about my book that makes it also special is that I worked in the film industry and I experienced a lot of things. And when I wrote the book about my grandfather, I didn't want to gloss over the pain that he and his friends suffered. Well, you know, because when you hear about Josephine Baker, Ethel Waters, Duke Ellington lived with my grandfather. He was a boarder on 124th Street.
Wow.
And 7th Avenue by the Hotel Teresa, and then my grandfather moved in, his wife, and because he had such a large apartment, and the son would stay on weekends, Mercer Ellington. So, but all of those people had ups and downs, and I don't think any of the Harlem Renaissance books really depicts it the way my book does.
Give us a teaser of some of the of an incident that we'd want to run out and go get it soon.
Okay, well, Connie's Inn was the main place. My grandfather opened up the Cotton Club. The Cotton Club was owned by Jack Johnson, the boxer, first. It was called the Deluxe, Club Deluxe. But the gangsters took it over, and my grandfather's main place was Connie's Inn, because they were not as prejudiced as the Cotton Club. The Cotton Club was so prejudiced, they wouldn't even, if the black people that worked there, the service workers and the performers, if they had to go to the bathroom, they were on their own to relieve themselves. They'd have to go out on the corner with a paper bag. That's how prejudiced they were. And see, people don't know that.
No.
But Connie's Inn was less prejudiced. My grandfather worked there. They gave him a little bit more freedom, but some of the rich white patrons complained because my grandfather had too many dark-skinned women in his chorus line, and they felt threatened by them, so they made him hire light-skinned or near white-looking chorus girls against his wishes. But they had to, the lead talent like Bojangles and Ethel Waters, they had to let them perform, you know, because they were dark-skinned. But the chorus girls were the ones that they picked on, and they made him hire light-skinned chorus girls. I
know everybody used to be. It was, if you're light and bright, you're right, you know?
Well, part of the whole thing was they were, you know, it was a club where they were drinking, the white people were enjoying themselves, and they didn't want to be brushing up, and they were threatened by a lot of the darker-skinned women at the time. He changed that eventually when he went over to the Apollo.
Yes.
And had all different colors. They called it sealskin. Darker-skinned women were called sealskin, which was a beautiful term back then.
Yeah. So they would call it seal, S-E-A-L?
Yeah, like a seal. Like if you see a beautiful seal.
Yes.
Little bit of hairs and, little oil coming out the water.
Yes.
They call them seal. You know, they had sepia too, but they also called them sealskin. Which was a positive term.
But that's unbelievable. I can't. I mean, you know, you wouldn't believe that. But you know what? You are. What's the name of the book again that you wrote?
It's called Rhythm for Sale, and I have a nice website called. You know, if you go to www.rhythmforsale.com, it could be one word or 3 words. You'll see photographs, and you'll see some of the reviews I got, and movies. I got my grandfather and Oscar Michaud directed the first all-black talkie movie called The Exile. And they did it in the Metropolitan Studios in Fort Lee, New Jersey, because at that time, Fort Lee was considered the Hollywood.
Well, you know what, Grant? I owe you some time. And what you have to say is so interesting. So let's let's schedule another interview because you're telling us about Harlem, things we never even knew. And, I mean, we want to buy your book as well, but I also would like some of this information to be transported and spoken to our audience. So, Grant, would you come back again?
I'd love to.
All right, please, because, I mean, that story you just told me about the what was that, the Copacabana, the Cotton Club.
Cotton Club, and the movie was The Exile. I have pieces of that on my website. If they go on rhythmforsale.com, they will see these women, not like Buzzley Berkeley. Buzzley Berkeley had to send his girls over to my grandfather's studio to train them in how to dance. You'll see these black women dancing with soul.